I just want to reflect for a little bit, a moment on this notion of institute, because I think that's interesting, this constellation of two institutes. I've had the privilege of being affiliated with two institutions in my life. The first was a group called the Wright Ingram Institute that began in Colorado in the early 1970s. A remarkable group of people that were working to a certain degree in the shadow of Buckminster Fuller and his ideas. Headed by a remarkable woman who's still with us, Elizabeth Ingram, who had an idea that education, in order to successfully address the looming problems of the 21st century, had to be cross-disciplinary. And she brought together a remarkable group of people, John McHale, Ian McHarg, Edward Teller, just a group of intellectuals and scientists that lived and worked on in these small truncated tetrahedron structures that we built on the Great Plains of Colorado. But what was really interesting were these very heady evenings where we were discussing what an institute was. And this idea that people with common beliefs and common goals and common ideals would come together with a specific intellectual agenda to try to advance their ideas. It was very much based upon a notion of a land ethic in the spirit of Aldo Leopold, not unlike the sort of ethically motivated aspects of the BFI mission statement and our own desires to find a kind of ethically rooted way of using the Earth's resources. You know, the institute, the notion of institute, is rather lightly tossed around in the United States. You know, I came across actually this Institute of Idle Time on the web the other day, and an Institute of Sports Fan Satisfaction. But in Great Britain, for example, it's a protected word, and you really have to have higher purposes when you gather under the umbrella of the notion of an institute. And the idea that this is really the best of the people that are thinking of a given topic that are working on that. So I'm hoping that this confluence of these two institutional groups might lead to something stronger and might produce some interesting ideas that move out into the community. So with that, I welcome you all to Cooper Union, and I'm handing it over to you, Elizabeth, is that correct? Oh, to Lydia. You're next on the stage, Lydia. Okay.
So my job today is not to introduce, but to contextualize the work of Michael Ben-Eli. And one of the main privileges for doing that is doing what I call intellectual detective work and finding pictures like this when Michael Ben-Eli was in conversation with Buckminster Fuller in the early 70s, if I'm not mistaken.
70 or 71.
70 or 71. And I took that picture from this book, Caras, The Improbable Dome Builders, which was published in 1973. And it narrates Buckminster Fuller's and Michael Ben-Eli's educational venture in collaboration with Caras, a group of 6 X Street gang members in New York, which later became instrumental in the community of the Lower East Side in Manhattan, and started community gardens, the University of the Streets performance space, and the first Lower East Side recycling center. Caras, this group of the X Street gang members, reached out to Buckminster Fuller in 1969 and soon got involved with dome building projects. And you see one of their domes here below the Manhattan Bridge. Now, in mathematics, a geodesic, as you may know, being an educated Buckminster Fuller audience, is the translation of the notion of a straight line to curved surfaces, defining the shortest path between points on the surface as segments of whole circles. The term geodesic originates from the Greek word geodesia, which means binding the earth and actually refers to the science of measuring the size and the shape of the earth with the shortest possible routes. For Fuller, the geodesic dome as a microcosm and a representation of the Earth was a manifestation of humanity's survival. And Fuller, at that point with Caras, asked Michael Ben-Eli to introduce geodesic math and guide them in building their project. And this is another picture from that book with Michael Ben-Eli working on the dome prototypes. And his role in that project and the community of the Lower East Side was instrumental. Now, the know-how of making domes also became the main theme of a series of countercultural instruction manuals in the United States Southwest. I'm just flipping through some more images of the Caras workshop in New York to arrive to, and here you see the whole group of the Caras members, Buckminster Fuller and Michael Ben-Eli in front of their dome. Now, this is an excerpt of Ant Farm's Inflato Cookbook, a self-published manual in 1972, and a clear reference to Buckminster Fuller on your bottom left. Many communes in the United States Southwest left behind a genealogy of instruction manuals for the construction of shelter in a perspiring writing endeavor of their processes and their building experiments. The Dome Cookbook was the first do-it-yourself manual for the erection of domed shelters, opening up a channel for architectural cookbooks including Dome Book 1 and 2, Shelter, Inflato Cookbook, Zone Primer, the Farallone Scrapbook, and many others. And you see here a timeline of all of these manuals, cookbooks. Throughout the pages of these manuals, architecture was staged as a cooking discipline in a comprehensive set of numerical steps that would spring an end-built product. By proclaiming themselves as educational resources and a collective written landscape of gathered and organized information on building, the cookbooks have marked a significant shift from determining final designs to procedural design expressions, techniques of production, and construction methods. And here you see the main people that were instrumental towards putting these manuals together, including Steve Baer, who wrote the Dome Cookbook, Stuart Brown, the creator of the Whole Earth Catalog, the Ant Farm Group, Lloyd Kahn from the Pacific High School, and Sim Banderin from Farallones. All of these people were a network of people in that region of the United States that were very much in contact with Buckminster Fuller, whose logic on synergy and domes was instrumental in forming these communities at that time. Now, the significant contribution that these authors have provided us is the scrupulous recording of their processes and the comprehension of their practice as a heuristic device and as an accessible piece of knowledge. To write methodically on building and eventually disseminate the manuscripts was a serious undertaking for the groups, who have created their own Californian-based publishing houses, all non-profit corporations, and insisting on disseminating the books almost entirely by mail. This is an excerpt from a page from one of these instruction manuals from the Inflato Cookbook in particular. This is another citation from the Dome Cookbook and some of the geodesic geometry and mathematics that was included as parts of these books. These are some experiments that were created based on the rules and constraints and steps of phases conducted in these manuals. And this is the kind of self-publishing revolution starting from the United States Southwest. Now, this whole condition with the emergence of these manuals was emerged from more than 2,000 communes that have sprung across the arid lands of the American Southwest in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Intentional experimental communities or social organizations were housed in complex geometrical dome structures and occupied the land that nobody wanted, the blank land of the American desert. The urban exodus these communes represent was quite significant. The turn from the city was partially due to the American baby boom of the 1960s and was accentuated by complex sociopolitical predicaments that marked the city as a catastrophic environment restraining the imagination and the freedom of the individual. Speaking of the city as a place not worth fighting for, Timothy Leary exhorted crowds of young intellectuals to turn on, tune in, and drop out. Many took his advice to heart, rejecting the political establishment and translating quite literally the call to take a truck, go west, and make a dome. The recognition of the city as a catastrophic place required its own reinvention, a new conceptualization of living that would replace the urban model. The task was to reproduce its complex network, services, and infrastructure in different terms. Stuart Brand spoke of communes, each on its way, as reinventing civilization. And here you see some of these communes on the screen, including the first one, which was Drop City in 1965, the Pacific High School out of San Francisco in the Bay Area, Red Rockers Commune, the Lama Foundation, and Lieber Common. This living laboratory needed to be a self-sufficient one, an autonomous unity that would be able to sustain itself, cut off from the main urban networks. Communes were to recycle their waste, produce and distribute energy, and achieve a degree of autonomy in a restored equilibrium with nature. These laboratories also needed to be in record with their findings from the experimental dome building processes and circulate them to a wide young public. They established their own countercultural building language, a heuristic list of expansive how-to advice, which is what you have seen in the manuals right before. It is this understanding of communes as laboratories in the wilderness that has attracted the attention of current architectural scholarship. Communes projected alternative construction methods by means of a politically actionable agenda. Their geodesy was mostly fabricated of assorted garbage elements. In this sense, communal ventures are historically marginal, even radical. Communes could not possibly avoid the critique that they were part of a nostalgic return to the land, a romantic restoration of Henry David Thoreau's transcendentalist sermons to go to the woods, if we might change his line, to go to the desert. They in fact depict an utter regression to previous forms of habitation, almost primitive ones, as witnessed in their off-the-grid, handcrafted shelters and intentionally arid lands. Assuming that the droppers were aware of the impossibility of providing pragmatic habitation solutions with their experiments, the exodus signified a sincerely meaningful moment for thousands of young intellectuals who, in the dramatic search for a home, were on the spot ready to live in truncated rhombic icosahedra. To them, these complex polyhedral structures embodied a more fitting representation of a home that was nowhere to be found. As Theodore Roszak argues in his book For the Useful Opposition of the 1960s Counterculture, a radical discontent and innovation can be found that might transform this disoriented civilization of ours into something a human being can identify as home. The dome was to droppers a material reconstitution of the whole Earth. It was both its geometrical representation and its operative analog, as domes were constructed out of the Earth's output, garbage. Within this context, roundness acquired mystic and mythic ideological implications. It was no accident that domes have almost exclusively been graphically represented in a circular format, which alluded to higher forms of holistic awareness. But even beyond the dome being a material artifact with a modified geodesic geometry, it mediated between the macroscopic scale of the globe and the microscopic scale of the cell and the crystal, all rounded elements that exist simultaneously in multiple scales, and in one way or another secure the function of living systems. Between zooming in and zooming out, the dropper's great expectation was to find the same information in different scales, and it would be precisely the crossing of zones that would contribute to the reinvention of the habitat. Negotiating microcosm and macrocosm, the dome was more than a physical artifact representing the earth and the crystal. It was itself representation of curved space. Exclusively criticizing the phenomenon of dropping out as a regressive phenomenon does not allow us for further evaluation of what could lie beneath the surface of this movement. It is suggested here that we dig below this surface. Droppers, for instance, despite their ardor in their applications of low-tech systems, made recurrent references to the space program. They used NASA's numeric tables as dimensions for their dome planks, and designed their domes by developing mathematical equations rather than drawings. Curtis Schreier, a member of the Antform group, once said that Steve Baer and his friends, when they started making these geodesic domes for the communes, never made any drawings. Instead, they wrote equations. In addition to the programming of their domed shelters, droppers shared a fervent interest in crystallography, mineralogy, and the biological processes of growth and metabolism. They avidly read the cybernetic theories of Norbert Wiener, Marshall McLuhan, and Buckminster Fuller, aspiring to project a unified global vision, one in which material reality could be imagined as an information system. Cultural theorist Fred Turner coined this the exact aspiration as a cyber countercultural vision when he writes, "To a generation that had grown up in a world beset by massive armies and by the threat of nuclear holocaust, the cybernetic notion of the globe as a single interlinked pattern of information was deeply comforting. In the invisible play of information, many thought they could see the possibility for global harmony." The affinities that Turner calls upon are also valid and relevant to our own discipline. Droppers, in their regression, anticipated much of the contemporary architectural discourse. Their echoes are still particularly vibrant in the widespread usage of digital media, which has been claimed as the revolution the world of architects has been eagerly longing for. We may wonder, however, if this alleged revolution is the direct effect of technological advancements, or if it was already underway by an entire generation of subversive thinkers who, however distant from actual machinery, were distinctively in tune with the systematization of thought that machines promised. One may then argue that the digital media revolution was battled not only by technocratic individuals who wore black suits and were adept with the use of punch cards, but also by people who wore graphic outfits and looked at the moon. Their regression may have been progressively evolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, and it's wonderful to see this historic context of experiments in sustainable communities. And tonight we're going to be hearing about a real evolution and very, very different concept of what a sustainable community is. And I'm going to introduce Michael, but I first wanted to just thank Kevin and Lydia and Patrick and Sunny so much for making this event possible, BFI's staff as well. This new nascent collaboration with Cooper Union's Institute for Sustainable Design has already catalyzed an intensely creative conversation between our two institutes, and we are just so delighted to be working with you and to have the opportunity to begin to develop programs like this evening for our increasing, ever-widening circles of communities. There's no doubt in my mind that the shared purpose of accelerating the understanding and implementation of whole systems solutions and design strategies to achieving a really enduring sustainable future is absolutely critically needed. It's at the heart of what we do at the BFI, and it's urgently needed in our colleges and universities. And Cooper's unique focus on architecture, engineering, and art provides a very interesting, potent, fertile ground for these ideas to take hold and find radically new cross-disciplinary form. I wanted to just recognize that Allegra Fuller Snyder, Bucky's daughter, is with us here tonight. I'm just delighted to have her here. And Allegra shared with me that Bucky just loved Cooper Union for its history, its the creative genius of its students, and it's very meaningful to be forging a partnership here. So I can't think of a better way to kick this off than hearing from our speaker tonight, Michael Ben-Eli, who's been at the leading edge of breakthrough sustainable design for over 4 decades. I had the pleasure of meeting Michael first met Michael in 2005, and he had recently completed the publication of what he calls the 5 core principles of sustainability. And they were written in response to what Michael recognized as the increasing dilution and lack of clarity around a definition of sustainability and the need to advance and restore some rigor to what that definition is and what the underlying ideas are, and to offer up a core set of principles and their operational implications. And we'll be hearing about these tonight and their concrete application in a remarkable desert community project. So Michael has served as a senior advisor to the Buckminster Fuller Institute since 2005. In that role, he's conducted in-depth research on Fuller's concept of comprehensive anticipatory design science, which has served as a conceptual framework for all of our educational programs. He was a very important advisor on the formulation of the Buckminster Fuller Challenge, our annual design competition, and served as a juror of that challenge. As Lydia pointed out, Michael was a student and very close collaborator of Bucky's for many years, involving both the Charas Dome project, but also research into advanced structural systems and the exploration of issues related to the management of technology and world resources to benefit all of humanity. He graduated from the Architectural Association in London and later received a PhD from the Institute of Cybernetics at Brunel University, where he studied under Gordon Pask. He went on to pioneer applications of system thinking and cybernetics in management and organization, and has spent many years focused on strategy development, organizational design, and change management. In the last recent years, 4 to 5 years, his work primarily relating to the issues of sustainable development, inspiring leaders in business around sustainability, also in the government, community, and students, led to his founding of the sustainability laboratories in 2008, I think, and to the development of Project Wadi Attir, which we will hear about tonight. So it's been a great personal pleasure and honor to get to know Michael and to learn from him, and I'm just delighted that you're here. Please join me in welcoming Michael Ben-Eli.
It really feels like home. I mean, with all these, so many friends in the audience here tonight and all the history and everything, it's really, I feel excited about being here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for the organizers for putting it together. I want, again, to mention Allegra, who's here. This really makes me shudder to think about what I need to keep up with now. But I also wanted to recognize a very good friend and colleague, Joshua Arno, who is here in the audience. Joshua has been an instrumental bridge between the BFI and what I've been doing in the last few years. Joshua's family are the lead funders of Project Wadi Attir that you'll hear about until now. And Joshua and his sister, Ruth, have been really instrumental in funding the work of the lab, and everything that you'll hear tonight is possible before that. So, Josh, thank you very much. I was told many times that the secret of a good presentation is to have one idea with 3 bullets or something. So I'm going to err on the, I'm going the other way, and I have much too much materials here which I'll have to rush through, and you'll excuse me for the kind of quick talking. What I wanted to try and do, however, is take you through a journey that I've taken myself that really has been inspired from the beginning from all my association with Fuller. The thing that I'd like to try and integrate is 3 different, not different, certainly related, but 3 concepts. I want to talk a little bit about design, but in an entirely speculative manner. I want to talk a little bit about sustainability and here more in a theoretical way, and then get to Wadi Attir, if we get there, that will give you those speculations and theory embodied in actual activities on the ground. Now, Bucky would always encourage us to think big, right? So we'll start by going to the context of things. Now, this here is a very remarkable picture. I'm sure many of you have seen the Hubble telescope, all the pictures that are coming from it and how exciting they are. This one here is a very unusual situation. This is the deepest portrait of the universe that humans have penetrated. This is looking back to 400 million years after Big Bang. You see how the vision here takes us also back in time. It's a fantastic journey. And you see here the first galaxies to emerge after that time. It's about 10,000 galaxies in this particular picture, and it's a very narrow spectrum. You know, it's about the aperture of about 10th of the diameter of the moon. So it's a tiny, tiny speck of what we are surrounding, our environment, if you will. Now, this is especially significant, and remember the number, 10,000 galaxies here. It only, not much more than 100 years ago, we thought that the Milky Way was the cosmos. Hubble was the first to point out to another galaxy. I think it was, I can't remember the name, but another galaxy outside of this. Now, when you look at this situation, what is happening in this incredible totality, it's fascinating because here you've got the picture of the Swan Nebula. These are basically dust clouds, which are gas and gas clouds that are shaped by ultraviolet radiation. The scales here are enormous. This is like about 3 light years across this picture, and it's 5,500 light years away. The reason why I'm showing this to you is that these are the hotbeds for star formation. This is where young, massive stars are being formed. These are the factories of stars. This is where things are born all the time as we speak. And as now there are many regions like this. Another very well-known picture is the gas pillars of the Eagle Nebula, again, a factory of making stars. All areas of star formations. Here's another extremely exciting picture. This is not a simulation. This is an actual photograph. It's a photograph that was taken by Adam Krauss and his team at the Institute of Astronomy in Hawaii. And this is actually a picture of a planet information. You have here a solar system information. There's the sun in the middle, surrounded by these gigantic dust clouds. And that little thing in the, oh, I have a thing here. Wait. Ta-da. This is actually a planet in formation, and astronomers are able to compute its age. This thing is young. It's the youngest planet in our experience. It's about 50 to 100,000 years old. Now, when we look at all of this, when we look at that cosmic environment, it appears that there are 2 types of major things going on here. There are regions of diffusion and spreading of energies, and there are other regions of compounding of energies, 2 completely different directions. And if you look at it, of course, the Earth is one of the most spectacular compounding energies regions that we can experience. This is where order and complexity are being formed. Complexification in the sense of Teilhard de Chardin. And all of this increased order really manifests itself in a sequence of formation of complex molecules, appearance of organic molecules, appearance of life, whole ecosystems, and of course consciousness itself. Now, when you think about this, all of this is happening against all odds. If you're a scientist and somebody will show you how should I say, like a cubic mile of space, where you won't even have on average, one hydrogen atom, and tell you, go and predict, compute the possibility of life, compute the statistical probability that will happen, every tell you 0. And here we are with the ability to think about all this, the ability to penetrate all the way to the beginning of the cosmos, and we still don't appreciate what we are in that regard. The possibilities there, of course, and the responsibilities are immense. Now, we have here then 2 fundamentally different, we talked about this consolidation and diffusion. There are basically 2 types of processes. There are entropic processes which diffuse, where orderliness is run down, if you will, according to the second law of thermodynamics. But at the same time, we've got areas where order is being created and order is being, as manifest by all these processes that we talked about. Now, the interesting thing here is human mind is probably one of the most powerful tools for order creation that we know. I know that we create a lot of mess, including this image here, but basically this is the potential that we have. And I think that this is where perhaps the true meaning of being human may be. So when you look at this kind of situation and think about some of the ideas that we talked about, you have here an incredible dynamic, constantly changing system. And it means a number of very important concepts that I'd like to touch on. First is that the reality, what we call reality, if you will, can be seen as a dynamic kaleidoscopic flux of intertransforming events. Right? The clouds become this, become that, become this, become that, explode again, become this, go into a black hole, don't know where they come on the other side. I'm sure we'll learn much more about this continuity of this picture than is realized today. What it means is that reality continuously reorders itself. It's in a continuous process of reordering. And the key point to make here is that human activities and human potentialities are really part of this gigantic self-organizing process. You know, we like to, all the conventional way of thinking about the cosmos isolates us from it. We are here and there's something that is happening out there. But basically it's one process, and our capabilities are one of the agents in that in this larger, not unlike any other component in it. So one of the, of course, interesting thing is that the immanent order that is part of all these things, immanent order in a sense that is expressible in what we call physical laws, the laws of physics and chemistry and so forth, is accessible to the human mind. We are able to observe that thing and understand the major patterns and express those patterns in those physical laws. Now, the idea of order creation is certainly at the heart of the concept of design. This is what design is about, creating order. And it entails the consciously kind of applying intelligence to arranging, rearranging, and optimizing preferred configurations. Arranging, rearranging, and optimizing all the bits and pieces, the building blocks of universe, in some preferred consideration or configuration or another. And this process is latent in nature. This is what nature does all the time. And it's latent in all humans. In that sense, really, we are all designers. We are all have this potential of participating in evolution itself. And certainly, we have to begin to see ourselves as agents in shaping reality. Now, the idea of being agents to shape reality is deeply enrooted in some of the familiar wisdom tradition, the Kabbalistic idea of fixing the world, the Buddhist notions of taking care of all sentient beings. All of these are behind that recognition that there is some special power here that can be, that if it were completely manifest, if it will allow itself to completely manifest, could really create some gigantic miracle. So with this in mind, we can see that in a general sense, design, when you strip the notion of what style and what shape and what period and whatever, design has to do fundamentally with the process of arresting or reversing entropy. This is what it is about. And this is a beautiful definition. I can't even remember where I found it. But design is the deliberate challenging of energies which otherwise would be diffused. You've got all this incredible tendency of things to diffuse, to increase entropy, and you have this capability of mind to understand what is going on and increase the trajectory of consolidations in order. And I think this, perhaps, that notion, if we think about it, this is the meaning of being human. This is what it means. This is what humans are different than many other things. The exertion of that potentiality. Now, the notion of deliberate implies the idea of purpose. Purpose in a sense of having a series of steps leading from intention to realization. So we can think of design as really the process of realizing intentions. And when we look at the world today, with all the challenges that are all around, what does all this mean? That really the worldwide transition to a sustainability regime is the ultimate design challenge. This is really what humanity is being called upon, to participate in that design project, what Bucky called design revolution, and bring about some order in the mess that we are creating. Now, that brings us to the idea of sustainability, and it's a word that has been bandied around, as Elizabeth noticed earlier, that it's almost lost its meaning. So I'd like to take a minute just to focus, before we go to how it's manifest in something like Project Wadi Attir. I'd like to what do we mean by sustainability, and what are the underlying concepts that have to support it, if you will. The first concept that is important is to realize is that the idea of sustainability pertains to a balanced interaction between a population and a carrying capacity of an environment. This is what it is about. It can be any environment, any population. It can be amoeba in a petri dish, or lions in the savannah, or humans on the planet. And this interaction has a very interesting aspect to it, in the sense that the two sides of the equation, the population and the carrying capacity, continuously affect each other. It's not a linear process. It's a dynamic, circular situation. Populations obviously modify their environments, and the environments are what makes a particular population possible in the first place. In fact, the whole history of the biosphere is a history of emergence of species that continuously modify the very composition, chemical composition of the atmosphere, for example, that made possible the emergence of other species and so forth. So the idea that this is, again, that same dynamic system that we saw before, of things continuously affecting each other and being affected by the process of affecting. Now, when you look at the situation of humans on the planet, if you increase the resolution of this cycle here, we get something like this. You have the population on one side, the carrying capacity on the other. Obviously, a population at every instant is defined by a whole complex interactions of things like birth rate, fertility, growth rate, death rate, mortality. All of those, incidentally, are things that are still not completely understood by demographers, why things go like this. But nevertheless, a population exerts its impact on the carrying capacity of an environment through its activity. And the activity really takes shape of two main channels. One channel is the demand on resources. In effect, any population feeds on its environment. And the other channel is the generation of byproducts. All physical processes generate some byproducts, and the process of using resources and living generate byproducts, and those byproducts have to be able to be absorbed by the an environment, what we call, in this case, sources and sinks. And now, what is happening in our time, of course, is that dynamics, that equilibrium is out of whack. We are over-exploiting resources in a way that is faster than the way that they are able to reproduce. And of course, we are overwhelming the oceans and the forest and the air and everything else with toxic byproducts that are a threat to life itself. So with this kind of a context, this diagram in mind, the definition that I would propose for sustainability is as follows. Sustainability is a dynamic equilibrium. That particular dynamic, that's what has to be preserved, that equilibrium. Doesn't matter how, that equilibrium. The dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and its environment, such that the population can develop to express its full potential. We're not putting any limitation of what can or should it do, other than without producing irreversible adverse effect on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. And you see that that definition has the same circular aspect that I tried to characterize before. And it's an important definition in the sense that not almost every part of it can be quantified. We can certainly talk about the scope, the amount of population. We can talk about rate of use of resources. We can talk about rate of polluting. And we can even introduce some qualitative manners as Bhutan is trying to do about well-being, happiness. There's no reason why we should not count smiles as a measure of how well we are doing, or something like this. Now, this definition is, of course, very different than the prevailing one, which is pegged to cross-generational equity. You know that sustainable development is development that takes care of current needs without jeopardizing future generations. That definition, if you really contemplate it a little bit, you'll realize it has no operational meaning, because it's open to any kind of interpretation that you like. And that's exactly why it was chosen, incidentally. This definition emerged in the context of the bilateral, the UN, where decisions have to be done by consensus, so you always have to seek the lowest common denominator that everybody's agreeing. No one will say I'm against future generation, but it allows everyone to go back home and continue what they're doing now without much change. So it's again, the challenge that we have to design for is to restore that equilibrium, basically. Not restore in a conservative way of going back to something that was before, but restoring that ratio. That is the point here. And that ratio is defined and redefined each time. That ratio for a Neanderthal man in a cave somewhere is completely different than humanity on the planet today, and so on. So you look at all this stuff. Now, when I say being out of whack, what I mean is what we see is, we call them usually environmental issues. They're really not environmental issues. Issues like the climate change and loss of biodiversity and the threat on palatable water and all the things that are the major problems, major world problems, are really symptoms of that losing that equilibrium. And you can ask what is going on here. And it seems to me that there are perhaps three essential perspectives on it. One is to say there's really no problem here. And that's still, unfortunately, the prevailing view of politics and so forth. Say just business as usual, the science really is not there, we have to do more research, we don't know. Of course, it's all reflecting current interests that are vested in continuing things as they are. There is another perspective that is true to many environmental economists, for example. And there they say Earth was large and human population was small. Now society and the world and the human economy is larger than the planet, so to speak. And we need 4 planets unless we reverse where we are and go back. The problem with that concept is I don't think that there is going back. You can't, you know, it's very interesting. Some of the best theoreticians who were able to understand and project what is wrong with the economy that is leading us there came back with the idea of those pastoral, semi-rural communities, almost going back to medieval days. I don't think that the genie is out of the bottle. I don't think you can replace it. Which brings me to the third possibility, which fascinates me personally very much. And this is that all those issues that I mentioned, that I talked about a minute ago, are really symptoms of blocked possibilities. Symptoms of something that is attempting to be manifest, and it's blocked by all the old ways of doing things. All our institutions and all all our way of decision making, all our way of thinking what is right and what is wrong, the values, and these are all, they belong to a completely different era. They belong to humanity that had a completely different experience. And that experience, incidentally, is best manifest by this thing here. You're all familiar with this, and you saw it, the huge explosion in population. It's less dramatic if you look at this graph in the last 300 years. You see exponential growth since the Industrial Revolution, but nothing dramatic like this. If you take a look about 10,000 years going back, you'll see that humanity always hugged just below 1 billion until suddenly it spiked as it did. Now, the interesting thing is most of the discussions about the future by demographers tend to focus on the on the slope, oh, I'm almost doing it reverse, on the slope of the curve at the top, the point that I want to make is that the big difference has already happened. Doesn't matter what will happen here now. Whether it's 9 or 10, doesn't matter. There is no precedence of managing the world with 10 billion, 9 billion, 11 billion people. And that's important to realize, because it means that all our ways of doing things, as I mentioned before, are really not up to the task of doing. We need to integrate all of this. We need to really be able to integrate humanity in the way that was never done before. And there is no book, there is no manual. There is no expert on sustainability. Nobody knows. And that's why we all have to think together and really make breakthroughs to get through this long jump that we are stuck a little bit with. And it's important because that means really reviewing everything. You know, our worldview, our basic values, the structure of the economy, the priorities of using of technology. Look at where technology is used today. I mean, the highest priority of using technology is in weaponry. And that's where the best science and the best design is going. We are able to design today, you all know this, I don't have to say it, kind of a missile that will hit somewhere 5,000 miles away in a bathroom while you are sitting somewhere underground. It's really amazing technology, but that's not what we should be doing, perhaps. And of course, governance and other idea. All of these require second-order change. It will not be enough to tinker with little things here and there. Really, the system itself, and by the system itself, I mean all the things, the values, the economy, the structure, all of those things have to somehow be able to change. And what is the objective of that change? Really, we need to be able to foster a well-functioning alignment between individuals, society, the economy, and the regenerative capacity of the planet's life-supporting system. Now, that objective is true for any period in history, in any possibility. But how you do it and what is the scope of the challenge is what is different. Remember again that one thing that remains always the same is that point of equilibrium that has to be achieved. So we have that definition, and the next question is, what are the principles that drive, that are behind that idea of sustainability? What are the principles? If you violate them, you will not achieve it, no matter how you call it. It's a little bit like saying, if you wanted to fly and you wanted to construct some engine to take you flying, you better understand the principles of aerodynamics. Otherwise, you end up like Daedalus and Icarus, right? Is that right? So in the same way, if we're serious about instituting the concept of sustainability as an enduring state on the planet, what are the principles behind? And in thinking about the various variables that are related there, I found it convenient myself to cluster all of those into 5 domains of 5 something. And quickly, let me just put them on. Those are the 5, the material, economic, domain of life, social, and spiritual domain. The material domains pertains to the basis, provide the basis for regulating the flow of energy and matter that really underlies existence. This is those principles that I talk, the physical principle, not man-made principles. These are how the system works. This is what we need to understand if we want to be able to work with it. The economic domains pertains to kind of the guiding framework for creating and defining and managing wealth. The domain of life really has to do with providing us with a basis for appropriate behavior in the biosphere. We're not alone here. There are many other species we're decimating in a huge rate, so we're not very good neighbors. So the whole issue of biodiversity comes here. The social domain, of course, provides the basis for social interactions. And finally, the spiritual domain is the domain which identifies the necessary value orientation and really provide the basis for universal code of ethics. So you mentioned ethics with sustainability before. This is the most important thing. The more I contemplate that, the more I realize that without that spiritual dimensions, all the rest is only techniques. And this is what gives us the foundation, the orientation, what we are. This is where that becomes manifest. Now, this is very interesting because when I started working, it took me quite a while to work on this concept. And when I would, this was in years that I was doing a lot of work with the World Bank and other multilateral institutions. When I tried to get advice and expose this to people, everybody was telling me, don't even touch that spiritual thing. If you want serious people to take you seriously, if you want to talk to heads of states or head of government, you know, put spirituality in, they will wave you away. So for a while I would put it in and take it out, put it in and take it out, until I realized that without this we're nowhere. So this is really the pillar. It's like the center of gravity. If you want, you can imagine this. Here's an exercise. You can imagine this as a tetrahedron, where you've got four of the things: the material, the economy, the social, and the life domain. And the spiritual domain is the center of gravity that really holds everything together. So those five core principles relate to statements about each one of those. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into the thinking behind them. So what I'll do, I'll just give you a sense of how they are expressed, what they are. The first, of course, the material domain. Maybe I'll say a few words just to link it. The material domain is really ruled, if you will, by the thing that I refer to as physical, as a law. Right here you have things like the law of interchangeability of energy and matter, the famous E equal mc squared, the first law of thermodynamics that talks about the conservation of energy, the second law about the direction of energy events, and so forth. But this is also where consciousness comes in, and where the application of intelligence to that physical reality is what makes all the difference. And the problem that we have today is that our whole economy is incredibly entropic. It's hugely wasteful. Some economists who were able to compute it are saying that we are using energy at about 5% efficiency. It means that of every barrel of oil that we burn, not only we create all the byproduct issues, but 95% just goes in heat and smoke. So there is a great deal to do in reconfiguring the economy to become more sensible, only from that physical point of view. And the first principle then says, contain entropy, contain because you cannot reduce it to zero, you cannot eliminate it, impossible to violate the second law, contain entropy and ensure that the flow of resources through and within the economy is as nearly non-declining as permitted by natural law, so that the circle can continue, right? Without diminishing, without evaporating. And that brings us to the second one, the economic domain. And here also, perhaps just a few words. When you think economies are about markets in a sense, and markets consist of places where transactions occur, any kind of transaction, and frameworks by which we evaluate those transactions. Are we profitable or not? And the problem that we have here is that our current framework is completely distorting. It is that framework that leads us, like blind people, into the wall. And it's distorting on a number of accounts. First, by emphasizing a very primitive concept of growth, as it gross national product and so forth, as being the goal of everything. As you know, the gross national product measure is completely inadequate. In fact, it measures a lot of the worst of the negative activities as a good thing. When you have how do you call it, Exxon Valdez, right? This big disaster that took about $1.5 billion to fix or something. That $1.5 billion increases the GNP. So we look like we're doing better and better the more disasters we occur, in a sense. But more than that, it really does not take good care of what economists call externalities. We are not computing 10 minutes? Okay, 10, 15. All right. Does not allow us does not take account of externalities such as the cost of impact and depletion and so forth. So the second principle says adopt appropriate accounting system fully aligned with the planet ecological process and reflect true biospheric accounting to guide the economy. I will just read the others rather than talk about them. The domain of life. Of course, here you have the issues of the fact that the success of human experience on the planet goes is being paid for, in a sense, by the destruction of many species. And here, the thing is not about not doing good with a spotted owl. What we understand now from science of complexity, from general system science, cybernetics, is that complex systems are stable precisely because of their internal complexity. And we are creating a planetary monoculture, both culturally and with respect to other species, which is really going to destruction. The social domain, oh, did I read the thing? How do you go back? There's something. Ensure that the essential diversity of all forms of life in the biosphere is maintained. This is very important. This is like a complete no-no. If you create big disasters with climate change, you can somehow restore by paying a lot for it. Once a gene pool is disappearing, it's disappeared forever, and you cannot restore it. On the social thing, we'll just say you want to maximize degrees of freedom and potential self-realization of all humans without any individual or group adversely affecting any other. Again, it has that circular structure to it, which is part of that story. And the spiritual domain has to do with that. You see, humans are basically spiritual creatures with a driven intent to reach always for beyond, always to grasp for a larger domain of integration. And here, perhaps I got a little bit too poetic, but it reflects what the difference between these and the others. Recognize the simplest dynamic continuum of mystery, wisdom, love, energy, and matter that links the outer reaches of the cosmos with our solar system, our planet, and its biosphere, including all humans with our internal metabolic systems and the technological extension. All technology is nothing but metabolic extensions, and embody this recognition in this universal ethics. Now, all of these principles have a derived implication, and those relate to, first of all, you have to look at them as a system. You cannot isolate them. They're all integrated and interdependent. Each one creates the others, and you can see this if you contemplate that for a moment. And together, they really provide the elements for a blueprint for the future. And they will include things like radical resource productivity and using, income energies rather than using fossil fuels, and assume responsibility for other forms of life. I don't know if you realize sometimes what is happening when you get a UN report that says in 30 years there'll be no fish in the oceans, no life. You know what it means? Unbelievable. I actually had an experience myself. I went with a friend sailing across the Pacific a couple of years ago. And he's an avid fisherman, and in the months that we were sailing, we were actually counting on getting fish. And we were trailing for 3 weeks. Every day we caught one fish. And when we got to Samoa, we saw why. You have this gigantic fleeting fishing fleets of factory boats that go out in the ocean for 3-6 months and package them, and they go with 30-mile-long nets and just got everything in sight. You can't go on like this, obviously. Project Wadi Attir, which we have 5 minutes for. No,
take the time you need, Michael.
Thank you. Project Wadi Attir is an opportunity and an attempt by the lab to manifest those 5 principles in a microcosm. It might as well be the planet. It's really small little things in the desert, but it would be the same for the planet as a whole. And this project tries basically to deal with it's a community-based undertaking with the Bedouin population that tries to develop a model for sustainable agriculture in an arid zone, which will contribute to the well-being of that population, will be true for the region as a whole and for any arid region around the world. So we're trying to develop a model there. Basically, the goals were threefold. One was to do something to contribute to the life of the Bedouins, a marginal community in Israel that has suffered a lot, so to make some contribution there. 2, to manifest those 5 sustainability principles in a project on the ground, really. And 3, to create a model both for an agricultural operation in arid zone, but also a model for development process design, community-based development process design. This was very important for me because most of the projects that I've seen in my years with the World Bank and other organizations like this, I was absolutely convinced that the whole approach to development project design is entirely wrong. It's lopsided, It has many, many faults with it. So here's an attempt to say, if I could isolate a little place, how would we do it right, so to speak? And this project tries to innovate on a number of dimensions at once. It tries to innovate on the technology dimension, on the social dimension, the economic dimension, the spiritual in the sense that it's value-based. We created a value proposition that the whole community subscribed to, and so on. And this is significant in the sense that if you look at sustainable development projects around the world, and there are many wonderful projects, you'll see that most of them tend to focus on one issue. It will be a project about water, or a project about energy, or a project about women, or a project about children, or a project about something or other. But they'll all be in isolation, will never be integrated into one whole concept, which is absolutely what is required if we're serious about that sustainability. I've seen situations where I did some work, to give you an example, one in Central America for the bank, with the idea of trying to integrate some of the economies there into one situation. This was the years, was about, I think, early 90s or something like that. There were about $4.5 billion of bank loans in Central America, but they were absolutely not connected. So in the same country, there was a lot of money going of working with farmers on the mountains trying to create value-added products, like shaded organic coffee and so forth. But there's no way for these guys to bring it to market because there's no roads. And meanwhile, there are huge loans for roads building to get the highway from the house of the president to the airport. So there's no integration of those. You remember the idea of order and design in optimizing? Nobody's optimizing anything here. And we have to begin to optimize the system as a whole. So much about this thing. I just wanted to give you a little bit, I'll run through this. It will be really an expressionistic kind of view rather than anything else. The Bedouins in the Negev, incidentally, originate basically the ethnic group that originates from what today is Saudi Arabia. They were nomadic people roaming all that area from Saudi Arabia through Jordan, the Negev of Israel, and the Sinai Peninsula, and some then to North Africa. They were moving, a lot of those tribes were moving, not the whole area, but much of it all the time. And the Bedouins in Israel basically were trapped in the Negev when international borders were created. In the Ottoman, under the Ottoman Empire and then the British regime, there's really no borders there. Nobody, and suddenly they were boarded, they are trapped in the Negev. There are about 200,000 that live in the Negev. They are probably the lowest socioeconomic group in the country. About 65% of the people live under poverty, under the poverty line. Very low in education, services, everything else. And most of government policy over these years have been disastrous. I mean, the idea to, you see, nomadic way of life is going out of style anywhere around the world. It's not the way of the future. And this is what happened in here. But the Israeli government tried to settle these people, not forcibly, but quickly. And there were the cities, towns, villages were created, but those things were created without any consideration of the people, how they want to live, what's their culture, what do they need, without any consideration that they were in an arid zone, so suddenly you need air conditioning and all those kind of things, and without any economic basis, so there's no jobs. Some of those towns, the largest, for example, is a town of 55,000 individuals, has about 85% unemployment. And since most of the people are very young, this is really a ticking time bomb. You cannot really go on like this. There's a lot of issues there of the way these people live. The half of the population lives in those towns, the other half are in what are called unrecognized villages. These are people that still have land claims. They say, you know, this is where we've been living for centuries, this is our land. The government says, show me your paper. I don't have any paper, so you are illegal. And if you're illegal, you don't get electricity, running water, and all of those kind of things. So this is the community that we're trying to live with. The area is here, the center. This is original town, Beersheba. This is Israel, as you can see. This is the Negev. This is the northern part of the Negev where most of this population congregate. I would say that probably 75 or 80% of the 200,000 live within that circle. And that circle is a very busy area. It has a big regional town, Beersheba, right here, and a whole lot of other things competing for attention right there, not the least of which is a gigantic military Air Force base that was brought from the Sinai when the peace with Egypt was signed, virtually dropped in the middle of all those villages, creating a whole lot of mess. These are all those, the little dots are all those unrecognized villages and so on. So this is an area where there's a lot of pressure on resources. Certainly you cannot run around with your goats as you did before. This is the area of the project. When we started, almost every expert told us that this is a fantasy. This will never work. And the government will never allow you to do it. You can't work with the Bedouins. You'll never get any support. You certainly will not get any land because that's in the issue, the heart of the issue of the struggle. We did get a fantastic piece of land here, about 100 acres. But as you can see, it's really arid. There's nothing there at all. This is one of the local ravine, Wadi Attir, from which we derived the name for the project. And these are different communities. This, incidentally, is the town of Hura, and the mayor of Hura is my counterpart on that project. But here you've got all type of things. Some of them are recognized, some unrecognized, and we are at the center of all that situation. We started the project with a long, about 6 months process of community discourse, talk. We brought a lot of about opinion makers to begin to think, what can we do together? What kind of project we can have? And there were quite a few ideas before we settled at the end. But we expanded that discussion. Incidentally, this is something that never happens with big economic projects where deals are made between finance ministries and the World Bank, for example, with no direct link to those who will be affected. And this was a process that took a long time, and one of its product was that principle, that value base for this thing. We also expanded that circle into the community at large, people that were not immediately involved. As you can see, some scenes that brings us back a few hundred years ago, moving from really Bedouin leaders to things like this, which is a reality that is disappearing very fast, but was very powerful for me to experience. This fellow here, Ibrahim, who is part of the project, is one of the last true Bedouins, really lives out with his goats. To go and visit him was like visiting Abraham in the Bible kind of thing, where he's slaughtering a little lamb and all the things. This was before I became vegetarian. And so on. So we tried to expand this discussion to as many people as we can to get support of the wider community that we are hoping to affect in the future through that little thing that we are doing there. Another enormous situation that happened here, we began to work together, taking our project team to start working with researchers from the University, Ben-Gurion University of the Negev and others. So here you've got a situation where 5 or so professors from the university are working together with a number of Bedouins who are illiterate in that sense of the science. And that was a tremendous adventure and very powerful. But it was absolutely required in designing the ingredients that you need. And you needed a few ingredients. You needed a Bedouin community to participate. You needed the technology and the science that is required for the design. You needed the financing to support all this. You needed the government agencies slowly. We didn't want to go first to them, but not to interfere or to support it and so on. We're also very proud on the fact that from the beginning we said that women must be part of this project. In the Bedouin community, as you know, if the Bedouins are the lowest rung of the Israeli society, women within the Bedouin community are also don't have too many rights. And there are enormously interesting phenomena now of young women who gain some education becoming a hugely powerful agents of change in their communities, because the governance is very hierarchical and male-dominated and very macho. The Bedouin is like a samurai. And so the sheikhs, you know, the world is changing. All these transformations occurring. The governance is by precedence. So these guys are lost. They don't know what to do. And they're losing the hold on their communities. And into that vacuum of power that emerges, a few young women are moving in a very, very courageous and exceptional way. But they usually tend to work with other women for women. And we said we want women as part of this project, as part of the project team, working with men in designing it and so forth. And we were very fortunate in having a few very interesting participating here. The project itself, as I said before, basically is an attempt to develop a model for a sustainable agriculture in arid zone. It will be based on the Bedouin experience and tradition and what they know well, but leveraged by very advanced technology. So at the heart of it will be growing a mixed herd of goats and sheep organically in order to for dairy products of various kind. Some traditional Bedouin dairy products are very interesting. They're going out. You can't find them anymore today. The desert didn't have refrigerations, so you had to create infinite lifespan cheeses. And we want to go back to some of this. So dairy products and meat, very important. We are already beginning to educate a group of women. This is a course that we had recently in cheese making. And out of this 25 women that participated, we chose 5 that would go to an advanced course. And then they will become the ladies who will run the dairy operation at the project. Another very important component is the medicinal plant. The desert is home to about 600 species of extremely potent medicinal plants that were really the healthcare system for centuries. And it's like in many other parts of the world, in the tropics and so forth, it's a knowledge that is disappearing. We're very fortunate to work with this fellow here, Ali Al-Hawasha, who is a local sheik that devoted his life to learning about those plants. And we are having a whole operation with medicinal plants to create a whole range of health products, from soaps and different teas to skin things and so on. Here is experimenting with some of the product that will eventually sell in the high-end market. You see, this is actually, it was very interesting, the stuff that Lydia talked about earlier about the dropout communities. Here we're not trying to isolate this and drop out of the world, but integrate into the world in a more powerful way. But still preserving some of the tradition and aspirations of that population itself. We've been spending a lot of time studying those plants, and remember, these are wild plants, and they grow in remote areas in the desert. We've been trying to domesticate them, and these are some of the experiments that you see here. Question of whether you use seeds or you use cuttings, or how will they do with irrigation under our I was going to say artificial, but it's the wrong way. So we have been experimenting with domestication, and we're getting some very nice result, as you see one of the plots that we've been using there. Another program is a woman-led product. Some Bedouin family still keep old seeds of vegetables, simple things like tomatoes, cucumbers, and so forth. But these are species that are desert hardy. They can do very well without a lot of water, with high salinity, and they're extremely nutritional. But nobody's using them anymore because everybody buys genetically modified tomatoes in the supermarket that have no nutrition value. So we're going to collect those seeds where they exist, create a seed bank to keep this genetic material, and have a program of training women who will then go and train women in household to reintroduce those things into household gardens. And here you've got some of those ladies learning how to prepare the land and take care of the seedlings and put all this stuff and so on. And it's been a very exciting program to see it developing. At the center of all this, we're creating a visitor and training center. It's really amazing. We started by an idea that there'll be like a little restaurant with Bedouin food or something like that. We'll sell something, but it's an emerging as a really a major educational facility. It will be a regional educational facility, and we started working with one of the local educational networks, and about 14 high schools from the whole region, not Bedouins, everybody, would be doing all their environmental and ecological studies at the site on the visitor center that we are going to create. So the learning, it will have a number of aspects to it. It will be a kind of professional trainings helping the communities around to do better with what they're doing, and of course education open in the way that I mentioned before. We have this incredible project team behind this, the project design team, which involves, as you can see, we have all the researchers from the universities, some engineers from professional firms, and some of the people from the community itself. And what we came up with is that integrated infrastructure that supports, we won't go into this in too much detail, the integrated infrastructure that supports this operation. And integrated in the sense that we're trying to link all the functions such that there'll be, to reduce no emissions, of course, and to reduce waste to minimum by connecting every byproducts to something else. And this is to give you a good example of one part of it, is this system here, which basically takes the manure and wastewater into a digester that produces biogas that we will use, as well as producing compost that we will use, and water, whatever gray water that will be used, not for the organic. Remember, this is an organic operation, so we'll be able to use this for plants around the buildings and so forth. This is an attempt this is a model biodigester. The biogas is not a major revolutionary step, but most of the experiences with cow and pig manures, which is both plentiful and wet. Here we deal with manure that is very small in quantity and very dry, if you're familiar with sheep and goats. So this young fellow here, one of the professors from the university, Amit Gross, has developed this pilot, and we've been getting very good results, and I know that we'll be able to use that as a showcase, really not as a major source of energy. We'll use this for cooking in the restaurant, but also to show to people and so forth. A wastewater treatment, which is basically a reconstructed wetland, but vertical. We're not going to use a lot of land. We're going to use a system that recycles the water through a number of tanks. And of course, at the heart of it, oops. This was the sexiest picture of the lot. We're not going to have it. We have there a very interesting, this was a picture of the collectors. I don't know why it disappeared here. It's a very interesting system that was actually developed originally at BGU. It's a photovoltaic system, but extremely productive. You know, photovoltaic cell that you have to cover whole areas with. This is the whole cell is about this size, smaller than a laptop. And it's extremely efficient in the production of electricity. It has a big collector that concentrates the sun radiation on it. So it creates extremely high temperatures on that unit, which requires cooling. And there is a water system that cools it. So the byproduct, the products of that system is both electricity. So one of the farm's products will be energy, as well as hot water. And for a while, we didn't know what to do with hot water in the desert. And then we came up with the idea that if you process wool, which we'd like to do, you need hot water, and you get lanolin, which is an organic base for many cosmetic products, which we can use with our medicinal stuff and so on, the way to. And the excess heat we're going to use for cooling. We had some engineers design a very interesting system that will use the solar, the heat created by that system to cool the building. So in the visitor center, we'll have air conditioning that will work on that. I won't touch about the other. Heart of that program is a very interesting soil enhancement. This site that I showed you before, remember how arid it is? It's really land that was degraded through centuries of bad management. And there is an additional problem there, that the kind of soil that we have in the Negev is something that when it rains, it immediately hardens like, and I'll finish in 5 minutes. It hardens like concrete, so the water doesn't really absorb. It all runs into those ravines. That's why you get in the desert those sudden huge floods that are familiar even from biblical times. So we have a very major system of a program of plantation. We're going to plant about 1,500 to 2,000 trees and shrubs on that piece of land that you see, in order to be able to sequester nitrogen, enrich the organic content of the land, capture the water, and also deal with much of the land runoff and many of the problems of instability in these ravines and so on. We created this big temporary greenhouse, and been for the last 3 years collecting plants and trees that will be moved to the site. This was 3.5 years ago, and this is how they look today, just about ready to go. This is the view of the site. Basically what you'll have here is this is the, can you orient yourself with the picture? So there's a main road here, the entries. This is the area for the visitor center, the pens for the animal, the dairy, all the solar plant, some of the other facilities. The darker green are areas for the medicinal plant that we'll be planting. And all of these will be pastures of organic fodder. One of the interesting things about the project, we managed to get into an agreement with one of the local kibbutzim and they will give us about 200 acres, and they will grow organic fodder for us so that we can provide people in the outer villages with that fodder so they can convert to organic growth. They can bring their milk to us that now they throw away. This is something I didn't mention, which is very important. The whole Bedouin economy was concentrated around herd and the family. So there was no such thing as unemployment. Everybody was employed with the herd. And they were using everything, of course, the wool for the tents and for clothes and carpets, the milk, the meat, everything. Now, all they do is buy, basically, nobody can afford to bring milk to market because you have to abide by all the sanitary laws and so forth. Nobody can afford to process wool, all the small farmers and so forth. So we're trying to reuse all of the things again. So these are the pastures that will be used. And this is like when you come to visit in 3 years, this is what you will have there. Here's, huh? No one, yeah. No one will live there. What we wanted to make sure is that people that make that, we've organized this as a cooperative, the first in the history of Bedouin, whatever. And we wanted to have a group that, the Bedouin are very tribal and clannish. And we wanted to also encourage getting out of this. So we wanted people from different villages and different towns. So we have people from the towns, some from the recognized villages, from unrecognized. And no one will live there. They will all come around. The community is around an idea. It's around an enterprise. And it was very interesting. In the beginning, it was very, very difficult for many people who thought that community is neighbors, people who live together. And it took some time to get into that. But we're going to do that as well. And not here, but somewhere else, I'm sure. One of the interesting things is that I haven't told you, we haven't really started work on the ground yet. The date of breaking things are in June, the first week in June. But already in the last couple of years, we have hundreds of visits. Almost every week, there's someone coming from around the world. So these are folks from the Economic Forum, World Economic Forum in Switzerland, the whole range. I can't even begin to tell you how many. Kids from the United States, from the Birth of Right. We were very honored to have the visit from the President of Israel last year. And at the end of the year, we had the groundbreaking ceremony, which is a very big event for the Bedouin community and everybody involved. Really putting the scroll in the ground. And as I said, we are ready to start work. I didn't mention it before. The cost of this project, the implementation, we had to spend about $1 million in this 4 years of planning and preparation and design. Not the list of which, because of all the very complicated statutory process that we have to go through. We were promised that it will take at least 8 years to get all the permits. We managed to do it in much, sorry. At the moment, implementation is very interesting. This is the moment that when the government jumped on the bandwagon. And under the leadership of the Minister of Development of the Galil and the Negev, they decided actually to finance up the 6 million implementation costs. And the other half we have still to raise. I think we have much of it already through promises of the JNF and some other local agencies and so on. So June, first week in June is where we start. This is the group of the founders, 12 founders. And incidentally, we have already started the whole process of reach out, getting some young people involved. And we're beginning to get kids in the 20s to join that group. And that's very exciting because it starts a lot of things. So to round up all of this, a little late, but nevertheless, it looks like humanity is really poised on a threshold of spectacular possibilities. And whether we'll be wise enough to ensure a future of peace and abundance is the big question that remains to be answered. But it could be by deliberate design, which is what we need to do, right? And so we need to really rethink everything mercilessly. There's no, you know, I was thinking about it actually today when I was putting this together, that it took me half my life to be taught all the things that everybody wanted to teach me. And it took another half just to get rid of most of it. So it's a personal kind of way of saying how difficult that rethinking process really is. We really have to jettison much of yesterday's conditioning in order to be able to start flying. Thank you.
Michael, this room belongs to you, and we should ask you questions.
Okay,
but
I'll move you right away.
I'm happy to sit up here and try to steer some of those questions. I, for one, found it just...
Can we close the projector? Thanks. Great.
Thank you. It was just a remarkable lecture, all in all. The project is very, very inspiring. I mean, oftentimes in this room, we are facing a lot of intellectuals and environmentalists presenting a portrait of hopelessness and despair. And to see that there are actually people out there that are busy saving themselves and saving their communities is very inspiring. And it seems to me, this particular project, to speak to Wendell Berry's guidance, that we should always try to solve for the pattern. And as you mentioned, not to solve for one specific problem. And this seems to be a beautiful example of solving for the pattern, to address erosion, water retention in the soil, enhancement of fertility, soil fertility, building of cultural institutions, social justice. It seems to really solve for the pattern. So in that sense, it's not so much a question. My question, though, is, to get to the technical part of it, is all of the water from on-site?
No. The water will come from 3 sources. That is the one aspect here that is perhaps a little unfair. But it's part of the reality, so I accept it. One is better management of the water. This is an area in the world that rain is very scarce and very small in quantity, and you get sometimes 3 or 4 years without any rain. This year, incidentally, was spectacular in rain. And in April, during the spring, the grass all over the desert was like knee-high. It was unbelievable, with flowers for as far as the eye can see, but this is a rare occurrence. So better management of the water there, usually essentially by using, preventing runoff by those plants and the roots holding the water and so on. Another source of water, since this is now a formal registered agricultural cooperative, we are going to get an allocation of water from the national carrier. As some of you may know, there is a major national carrier that takes water from the Sea of Galilee all the way down the south and really feeds all the agricultural communities along the way. And we are going to get an allocation from this. But the third and a very important source is an interesting one, and it's true to the spirit of the project. There is an open sewage that runs in one of those ravines in that neighborhood that takes sewage from the West Bank, from Hebron and Nablus mostly, and runs through the Israeli Negev toward the Mediterranean. And this is really toxic, nasty stuff. It's all the garbage that comes out of there. And the Palestinian Authority was not able to handle that issue, and it just flowed through that place, very toxic. You know, people who come in touch with it.
Through the ravine at your
Through the ravine in open.
Yep.
And the kids play in it, the animal drink through it, and you have a lot of disaster for them. So one of the local NGOs took the government all the way to the Supreme Court to force them to do something. And the result was building a water purification plant that was just opened started operating about 6 months or a year ago. And to our luck, that plant is built within the jurisdiction of Hura. And the mayor of Hura, therefore, has something to say about allocation of water. This water, incidentally, the process is a very advanced water purification process. Go through 3 processes. The water that come out, you can drink, virtually. What goes in, you don't want to come near.
Right.
And it's good enough quality water that we had to check with the Organic Institute or something that we can use for our land. So these are the 3 sources of water.
Good. Shall we hand it over to the audience?
Yes, of course.
See who has a question for you?
Yes, something all the way in the back.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. What kind of shrubs and trees are you using to plant? Are they local? Are they far away?
Yeah. Most of them are local, and they are all they are selected for being native trees and shrubs, and those that are good for the animals, and those that have some properties like sequestering nitrogen and thing of that nature. Most of them are local. We are going to have a few that are not, but this will be as an experiment for some fruit-bearing trees. But that will just a very minor operation. These are trees that are brought from Africa or Morocco, but they are desert species as well that have been introduced to that area and done very well. Good?
So, Michael, you indicated that this was an area that had been overgrazed for centuries, probably, right? So is there some belief that there will be like a larger soil building project that's possible out of this?
It's not only a question of overgrazing. That's not. It's the wrong way of grazing and the wrong management of the soil that was not allowed to replenish, to rejuvenate itself. And what we'll try to demonstrate, and it's remained to be seen how successful we will be, because the area that we have under cultivation will be rather small. But how to cycle the animals on the fields, on the pastures, in a way that will not destroy it. The other issue there has to do with the quality of the soil that I talked about before. The fact that because of desertification, there was no organic matter there, and the soil became poorer and poorer with the years.
And less able to hold water.
Less able to hold water as well.
I have one question about rural communities, which many rural communities in the past have used these kind of systems of cyclical reasoning and recycling of resources. And I'm wondering, in the age of bioengineered tomatoes and technology and Wi-Fi, how can a project like this reinvent the notion of sustainability rather than kind of harken back to a kind of rural and bucolic modality?
I mentioned that, I think I hinted at it earlier when I said that we're trying to integrate into the Israeli economy altogether. As I said, I don't think the attempt is to create a pastoral community, but the idea is how to, many of the Bedouins, no matter what they do, even if it'll be somebody who's a doctor, they still like to have a few goats and camels at their house or something. So there is a tradition there that has an economic contribution to make as well as a cultural one. And we'd like to be able to make sure that it can be strong, that it will not be as menaced as it is now. And there are possibilities. I mean, we'd like to create, for example, high value-added dairy products, organic goat cheese that will go to boutique stores in Tel Aviv. We'd like to be able to create products from the medicinal plants that eventually will find perhaps markets in Europe. So the idea is how to take a potential there and let it flourish in the context of the world today, which is what we have to solve. As I said earlier, there's no going back. Now, what is very interesting, because of this project, many of the Bedouins suddenly started realizing that their culture was about sustainable living in the desert. When they lived as nomadic people, they had to rely on everything correctly, like many Aboriginal groups in whatever continent they are. So some say, oh, we were always a sustainable society, and that's why this project kind of revives. It's very interesting to see suddenly that pride, say, oh, we were always like this kind of thing. And we are kind of going back to it in a sense. But not back to it in a sense of going back to a particular kind of way of living that is not going to get back again. You
because
can't.
There are high technology components.
And there are very high technology component. I'm sorry that for some reason you didn't see that solar thing. That's very exciting. This is as high technology as can get. And the combination of that solar energy with a cooling system is, again, as high technology as you can get. It's a total experiment. It doesn't exist anywhere there, the combination of the solar, the photovoltaic with the cooling. And we just got a very major grant from the Ministry of Energy and Water to demonstrate how it can work.
Just to riff off the young lady's question, I applaud you for this mythic quest, and it is somewhat mythic going to the desert, and there is a long tradition of it. You saw from the 70s, many people have tried it. my question is, and there are other experiments happening now, like Masdar City, not too far away from there. And as one writer said, it's a great experiment, but if it doesn't influence what happens in city building, it's not going to make
What happens where?
If it doesn't, in Masdar City, if it doesn't influence what happens in the cities of the planet where most of humanity lives,
Yeah.
then it probably will fail, because that is where we have to really. So my
yeah.
question for you is, how are you going to influence the cities with what you're doing?
Okay. Remember we talked about the sustainability laboratory? One of the ideas for the lab is to create a network of advanced research institutions that map onto ecozones. So this is the desert. We have some operation in the tropics, and we'll start something with the ocean and so forth. Urban areas is, of course, one such ecozone, which I hope will be able to integrate in what we do quickly. But the question is very important, because a great deal of the sustainability-related projects around the world focus on marginal communities like this. This was by chance in this particular case. And I agree with you entirely that the heart of the issue is not with marginal communities, is where the heart of the industrial economy, which is all upside down. So the real challenge, but this is also where the bigger forces of resistance are. And that's why there's a great deal to do there, and a great deal of design has to focus on the whole, how to integrate the whole production system, the whole issue of energy and water. Water is going to become a very major issue in urban, and when you look at it, most of the urban areas around the world are totally dysfunctional. All the mega cities of upward of 10 million people, they have no infrastructure, they have no jobs, there's no economy, there's nothing there. So there's a very, very major design challenge there.
I think one could argue also that it sets up a model that might offer an alternative to, everyone is moving to the cities because that's the only place there's an opportunity. But I think a lot of people, if there was an opportunity to live in a village setting with some economic foundation, would choose to do so. I mean, we see a little bit of that happening in this country, where people are starting to return to small-scale agriculture because the urban options are hard on people, frankly. It's hard to make a living, it's hard to raise a family, it's a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, so it could be argued that it's presenting an alternative that might allow some choice to the urban model as the only suitable strategy of habitation.
I will only add to that another thing, and that is that I would approach an urban issue in the same way. That's what I was trying to say, that this is a microcosm of demonstrating the embodiments of those 5 principles. So when you approach a city, you'll have to deal with the same issues of energy and water and economy, and what kind of social things is happening there, what is the governance system, what is the economy. And these are all the areas that we try to innovate on this particular case. So I'm not saying that this is a model for life, everybody should live like this, but it's the same principle that would drive the design of problems on any scale, I think, like that.
You're going to have exchange programs with cities in Israel?
Interesting thing, we were just approached by that same ministry that supported this thing to see if we will actually work with them to create a permanent Bedouin settlement, a model where people will live as well. And I think it will have impacts in many places and in many unpredictable ways.
A lot of those 70s experiments, if not all,
Yeah.
no longer with us.
Yeah.
Kind of related, yes. I guess I'm wondering about the expandability and the connectivity of these systems. Basically in relation to your comment about making sort of the high-end cheese or the lanolin or the special products, and then having them take on a market in Tel Aviv or in Europe. How do you actually sort of envision new kinds of transportation networks or methods for the distribution of these new products that that they clearly will have a value add in these other markets, but the value has a cost based on your other structure. So I'm wondering sort of how you envision this actually getting out into society or expanding.
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. The first step will be to actually integrate that into the local communities. And the next thing will be to be more ambitious, yeah. But one thing, I think we'll have opportunities to work with other communities, not only locally. We already had some discussions with groups of Bedouins in Jordan. It's something that's moving very slowly, but we'd like to have such a regional project with our Bedouins, with Bedouins in Jordan. And so there'll be ways to spread it. Maybe we'll carry the cheese with camels to Europe, you know. I mean, and that will be a tourist trip, right? So there are all kinds of ways that will emerge. Yes.
Yeah, Michael. In your talk, entropy and so forth, one term that I didn't hear, I was wondering. I got a two-part thing. I didn't hear the term ephemeralization, or through good design, being able to do more with less. There's many examples with microprocessors. How much is that principle that Buckminster Fuller was so engaged in relevant in terms maybe of things we don't see but over the horizon in terms of the revolution of design? And then the second thing I'd ask you, I have a friend who had done, we're in a seminar at Columbia, and he's from Israel, and he was doing desalinization. They had a thing where I thought he said, maybe set me straight, that he had something like 40% of the water was coming from a economically successful desalinization project. Is that true? And is that true on a global scale? Those two things, if you could address.
Okay, I'll do the desalinization first. Israel is one of the world-leading desalinization technologies, whatever, and there are very large plants already in existence that supply, I don't know if it's 40% or what, but there are a lot of water already comes from that. Also, economically, yeah. Economically, because you need it. I mean, that's where the externalities come in. You know, there's a moment where you need the water where you can get it. Now, the desalinization issue is also particularly important there because there is a gigantic aquifer that ranges from Jordan all the way for western Jordan throughout Israel and all the way to Libya, basically. It's a gigantic aquifer, but it's basically brackish, salty water. Not salty like the sea, but this water will require those kind of processes, and the university, the Ben-Gurion University that we're working with, that is a pioneer in many of those desalinization experiments.
There's a huge aquifer under the Sahara.
Yes, it's the same one that I'm saying. About the ephemeralization, I can assure you that almost everything we did in the last 4 years is doing more or less. I mean, not in the way that you...
I was thinking in broader principles, you know, is there attention being given to elegance of design and ephemeralization, microchop, or, you know, recycling and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the recycling is absolutely key of it. Yeah, I think that those elements perhaps will manifest themselves best in the buildings. The buildings that we'll have on the site, we'd like to be model green architecture or something. So we'll see how it will come into being. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
A really wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to have you at Tripoli. I look forward to communicating more with you. Beautiful project.